Shabbat Shalom, my friends. Well, the lazy, hazy, crazy days of summer are really upon us. As for laziness, I have so much work sitting on my desktop right here, and I just don't want to do it right now. Laziness. And the skies are truly hazy, but unfortunately the haze right now is created overwhelmingly by these horrific forest fires in the United States, in Canada, in Greece, Turkey, Italy, around the globe. And who could not help but feel that a little bit of craziness right now wouldn't be such a bad idea. But along with that laziness and haziness and craziness is the fear and the dread that we all share with the escalating impact of the Delta variant. I pray for your well-being. I pray for our well-being, and I pray that we all will be visited soon by a great awakening, an awakening to the truth that our own personal decisions can and will have a significant impact upon many, many others. A great awakening that such a truth must now become very important to us. Okay, so let's play a simple late summer game, especially since the new co-hosts of Jeopardy have officially been named, and one of them I have heard is a well-known, bona fide neuroscientist. Okay, question. What one thing do all of the following have in common? Britney Spears, Mario Cuomo, the Democratic state legislators hiding out in Washington, D.C., the banning of mask mandates in several states, the big lie, Bill Cosby, who gets to see Trump's tax records, and legislation involving voter rights, voter restrictions, who knows, maybe even the pillow guy. What single thing do all of those items have in common? Couple of seconds to think. Okay, now, if your answer is they all require judges and courtrooms, then you have won. Good job. Our Sedra is Shoftim. Deuteronomy 16:18, and following a shofet is a judge, Shoftim, judges. Our Sedra is filled with examples, concrete examples, as to what justice should be. Well, that sounds simple enough, doesn't it? We already know what is just and unjust, right? Well, it's actually a little bit more complicated than it seems. What feels like justice to a collective may not feel like justice to an individual. What feels like justice to an individual may not feel like justice to a collective. And what feels like justice to the accused may not at all feel like justice to the victim, and vice versa. So what is justice when it comes to restoring art stolen by the Nazis, or when stolen by colonial powers 200 years ago? And what is justice when those who were brought to this country in the 17th and 18th centuries as slaves, and who became key parts of the economic engine that allowed our country to both survive and thrive? What is justice when the descendants of those slaves feel that they are owed much, much more than heartfelt apologies? What is justice when a long-retired prince of the Catholic Church, a man in his 90s, will be brought for what will amount to be an ecclesiastical trial for admitted acts of sexual assault committed more than 40 years ago? And what is justice when one of the most highly respected American rabbis of the second half of the 20th century is accused of severely abusing his position? Things are not as obvious as we might casually believe. Okay, details. Our Sedra provides details to begin the process of fleshing out what a consensus view of justice should look like. It poses questions and then answers them. But because it didn't take long for those foundational answers to be understood as insufficient, those answers have been expanded upon in the Talmud and other sacred literature, civil literature, all that followed to our own day. What should you do when you catch someone who is a likely murderer? What should you do when someone overtly ignores the decisions of a court? What do you do if you catch a charismatic charlatan who willfully confuses and misleads? I don't know what that example is. What do you do if one person unintentionally but perhaps carelessly kills another, or was it simply a tragic accident? What do you do if you have only one solid witness to a serious crime? What do you do if someone knowingly violates your property boundary? And what do you do if someone knowingly commits perjury in court? Are we alone? Are you ready for a troubling question? Who among us actually cares about the civil laws in this week's Sedra? After all, we don't live in a theocracy. We don't live in Iran, and we don't live in the heart of Mea She'arim. But here's another secret just among the few of us. Despite all public protestations to the contrary, Sharia law is not blindly applied in Iran. Neither is Torah law blindly applied today in Mea She'arim. At the very least, Torah is still a living law. It's useful to remember that Sir Francis Bacon once astonished his generation by stating that British common law is founded upon what he called the laws of the Romans and Grecians and the laws of Scripture. Modern scholars have added kind of a quote here: common law has its origins in old local customs, the civil law, the canon law, the writings of philosophers, and texts of Scripture, interwoven with the accumulation of more than 1,000 years of statutes and judicial decisions. So we ask again, what connection do we have to the civil laws in this week's Sedra? The answer is a lot. Look, not every text dealing with civil law in the Torah is worth preserving as written. We know this. Not every law dealing with, for example, witchcraft or homosexuality or women's rights or the rights of non-citizens or the laws dealing with defeated enemies or the laws dealing with religious dissenters remain compelling and pertinent laws. All these laws are in the Torah, and some of them just don't apply. But those laws do represent foundational efforts to create a just society. Might have failed, but they started. The principles behind the most objectionable of laws in the Torah still bear the hallmark of those who believe that decency and mutual cooperation and shared involvement in governance are vital to the establishment of justice, because without justice, they knew back then, no matter how they expressed it, societies could not survive. Read our Sedra and wonder about how our ancestors came to seriously grapple with justice in a way that has shaped all of Western society. 2,600 years ago, they cared about the difference between manslaughter and murder, between the balancing validity of two witnesses over one, about how deceptive words can destroy the soul of a society, about how local citizens must actively involve themselves in the judicial process, and that the true power of a community resides with the people and not with monarchs and oligarchs. What is the principle behind the command in our Sedra for a king to keep a copy of the Torah by his side always, every day. We understand the principle here, but remember that in all likelihood that principle was written down by a reigning king who put into the text a limitation on his own power. The third verse in our Sedra must be understood carefully. After first stating the demand that we have Shoftim, we've got to have those. The text says, Sedek, Tirdof, justice shall you pursue. The making of laws, my friends, is a never-ending process, guided for us by what we Jews would call Sinai values derived from Mount Sinai. The word tzedek is repeated twice here. Tzedek, tirdof, because justice is hard. Justice is really hard. So much of what we take for granted in our communities today emerged from the texts in our Sedra today. And so, my friends, they deserve our devoted attention. Shabbat Shalom. Have a hazy, lazy, crazy week. Enjoy that little bit of craziness. Study the text. See you next week. Shabbat Shalom.